It's such a sterile album. It's such a pomp album. It's so slick and humorless and without any real sheen or with all sheen, no character, all surface, no substance. It's the existentialism of living in large rooms and all of the woe is me kind of privileged first world miseries that entails. It's lovely, romantic, trendy wallpaper, but all the same, it's such an attempt to be smoothed over and conformist and to be kind of radiant and yet flat. Perhaps stoic is the better, more appropriate adjective there. It sounds like a refusal of the 1970s. And if it's a callback to anything, it's that kind of yearning pop of the mid 1960s, doused in the, I guess you might say, the new romantic, fashionable, elegant, sleek clothing era of the earlier 1980s in the United Kingdom, anyway. The production sound on this album is almost quite flat compared to albums around it, dare I say, in the early 1980s of the new wave bracket in the United Kingdom. I might list off some examples and see if I know what I'm talking, see if I'm actually onto anything when I say that. It lacks the pop of New Order's Power, Corruption and Lies. And when I say pop, I mean, pizzazz, a bounce, a flavour. It's almost the polar opposite of English Settlement by XTC, which is this evocative series of landscapes, almost more art rock and closer to Roxy music than... Actually, you know what? If English Settlement by XTC is evoking Roxy music circa For Your Pleasure and Stranded, Simple Minds is exploring the genre that Roxy Music was working with and popularizing on Avalon in 1982. Well, since New Gold Dream and Avalon are released the same year, I suppose it's... I don't know, they're both just feeling what's in the air at that time. It hasn't nearly the personality and depth of Tin Drum by Japan. It's not nearly as catchy or really polished and accessible as The Lexicon of Love by ABC, straightforward and superficial and standard synth pop derivative as that new wave pastiche as that album is, really. Let's even look at it within the context of 1982 in general. It's not nearly as interesting or evocative, vivid, versatile as Pornography by The Cure, The Dreaming by Kate Bush. That's such an eclectic, interesting album. It might have a slight... I don't know, the Pornography by The Cure, even, it feels like more of a varied trip than New Gold Dream, even if it is not necessarily in terms of song variety and structure, pop structure variety, you know what I mean? Hex Induction Hour by The Fall is the truth compared to the pretensions of New Gold Dream, That fourth Peter Gabriel album, that's pretty great stuff. Hey. A Kiss in the Dream House by Susie and the Banshees? Oh my goodness. Big Science by Laurie Anderson. What a masterpiece. I think Signals by Rush is one of the greatest albums of all time. I think The Nightfly by Donald Fagen is as much a pop masterpiece as anything. I mean, that's so phenomenal. And yeah, I must say The Nightfly demolishes New Gold Dream, honestly. I much prefer 10 to 1 by Midnight Oil, but that might just be me being an Australian, I don't know. Epic Garden Music by Sad Lovers and Giants is one of my favourite things of all time anywhere. Oh, here's one. You Can't Hide Your Love Forever by Orange Juice. This might be the greatest pop album of all time to me. This is like... I love and adore Pet Sounds, but this is like a double Pet Sounds to me. And New Gold Dream has no hope of competing with the Sunshine jangled genius of Orange Juice on that debut album. Sorry, Jim Kerr and co. I do apologise, but it is what it is. You might even agree with me thoroughly if you heard the album, which you may have at this point. I mean, I don't know, the Scots just did their pop really well at this time. Seriously, that Orange Juice album almost renders the Simple Minds album irrelevant, but let's bear with us for now at least. After the Snow by Modern English, that's a fantastic album. Quite cliche, but I can't get enough of it. I just eat it up. Absolutely love it. Sulk by Associates. Oh my god, New Gold Dream is getting demolished in this year. Jeez, I didn't even think it would be this bad. I'm going over the Rate Your Music best rated albums of 1982, just so we're all clear, by the way. And then even in the context of Simple Minds, I must say, my favourite Simple Minds LP album would be Empires and Dance, is what it is. I've talked about that more so in the previous Sparkle in the Rain upload. Although I will say, this all being said, I still think New Gold Dream represented a stronger piece of recorded music overall than Sparkle in the Rain, much as I do quite like that album overall, as again expressed in the previous upload. If you heard that, you may or may not have. It doesn't really matter. Well, if for more context on New Gold Dream, actually, because I do describe the album quite a bit in that review, despite it being about Sparkle in the Rain predominantly. So maybe I would recommend listening to that prior to delving further into this, if you haven't already. Anyway, let's embark upon the track list and see if I can't feel as though I was mistaken at any point about my my vague nastiness toward the pretensions and ideals as I perceive them of this particular album.
Someone, somewhere, in summertime. So good. It is actually so easy to get lost in this album. Pure pop perfection in a very ideological sense. The ideology of someone who thinks pop is the be-all end-all of the popular music experience or lifestyle. For someone of that disposition, this album is aged like a fine wine. For those who loved the pure pop shopping mall lifestyle of the 2000s, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, Pussycat Dolls, or Avril Lavigne, New Gold Dream has aged perfectly just for your ears. Almost the ultimate poptimist album, or at least one of the defining ideological statements of poptimism. If one is a poptimist, this is everything they seek for in music, whilst denying all other forms, elaborate rock, intricate jazz, refined classical or experimental electronics, in favor of streamlined, commercial, populist, easy, mainstream, anti-experimental, anti-alternative, pro-mainstream, anti-countercultural pop pizzazz. It uses elements of, more experimental or artier music, but it's all supplemental to these pop hooks and these driving melodies which hook an audience in and, essentially functions as upbeat, up-tempo dance music a lot of the time, or, just bass heavy, when these keyboard flourishes, dancey rhythm guitar chimes from Bertkill, and Kerr's melancholy, which you kind of sink into and kind of ride with as he holds a note. This is it's all to serve, just the pure function of pop music as a product, more or less.
Sparkle in the Rain was a stab at stadium/arena rock, being an icon group for the masses. They moved away on Sparkle in the Rain. They moved away from the upper middle classes and upper classes and moved instead to pander toward those who were more their audiences, the working class and lower middle classes, whereas Sparkle in the Rain, New Gold Dream was more of an example of them trying to pander to the upper middle classes/upper classes, that sort of lifestyle, which they were occupying given how much money they were making as a band, at that point, I'm sure. Let's talk about the members of the band and what they contribute to the overall sound of the Simple Minds experience. Jim Kerr's lead vocals and lyrics. He's a fine enough vocalist, but as a lyricist, if you just read these out, there'd be nothing. Within the context of the music, he really knows how to sing against this band and how to write, how to present his words in conjunction with the tracks. So I'll give Jim Kerr that, although if you just read the lyrics out as poetry, I don't think it'd be very good, to be frank. Charlie Berkel is fantastic. Guitars and effects. He is one of the coolest guitarists of the post-punk era. What an iconic voice, just so many interesting sounds and worlds built up by his strumming, his rhythm guitar. Beauty. Michael McNeil, fantastic on keyboards and effects. Everything he brings to the group is... He makes the songs in a way. I think without him, these songs would have no personality. But the person who's writing these songs, first of all, the songs always seem to be based around this bass guitar foundation, sometimes quite an elaborate and heavy hooky bass riff, like in Glittering Prize or Promised You a Miracle, the most famous songs in this album. There's Derek Forbes, in my opinion, probably the most talented member of this band, it would seem, or the MVP of the band, put it like that. The sound is so reliant on Forbes and McNeil then kind of spicing it up, I suppose, Berkel as well. But Forbes is ultimately the rock with which this band is kind of, uses as its foundation, I would suggest. And the drumming situation in this album is kind of interesting, actually. On the first, fourth, and sixth to ninth tracks, it's Mel Gaynor who would become their permanent drummer on Sparkle in the Rain. He was ex of that ferocious new wave of British heavy metal band Samson, which is most well known actually for Bruce Dickinson being their initial lead singer before he moves on to Iron Maiden on the Number of the Beast album in '82. It's this same year actually. But I guess Samson also lost Mel Gaynor, their drummer, as well as their lead vocalist, because Mel Gaynor was picked so he could bring home that big music sound for Sparkle in the Rain, which makes that album so distinct, we could say. But yeah, he was replacing Mike Ogletree. Well, Brian McGee had been the drummer on the previous album, and then Mike Ogletree plays drums on tracks 2, 5, and 6 of New Gold Dream. Kenny Hyslop plays the drums on track 3, Promised You a Miracle. So yeah, there's 3 different drummers on this album. You can't necessarily tell. It's all blended in together quite well. Maybe if you were a drummer and were listening very precisely with headphones, you could pick out differences and maybe have a preference. Although for me, I can't necessarily tell who's who here. So, but yeah, let's continue on this. The ultimate no questions asked pop music release. Now the second track, Colors Fly and Catherine Wheel, is really, really strong. And of course, Promised You a Miracle. That's pretty good stuff. It has a disco skeleton / structure for something more modern, refined, well, in the context of 1982, more modern, refined, existential, and, 80s. But how is it not disco? Because of bourgeois trivialities, we call it classy, ethereal, new romantic instead. See, this is the masterpiece of deliberately, passionately, superficial pop music, indulgence, and apathy. You essentially, if all modern pop music is essentially just reworkings of disco, more or less, Promised You a Miracle, along with, things like Michael Jackson's Thriller, Grace Jones' Nightclubbing, ABC's The Lexicon of Love, these albums exist to posit, oh, look, here's the new replacement to disco. And it's like, well, isn't this just kind of disco for new sheen? And it's like, no, because we don't call it that. And it's like, perfect. This is pop music lifestyle encapsulated. The fact that we're just going to bring out something that's the same as the last thing, but we're just not going to call it that. It's lovely. So easy to imagine Promised You a Miracle as a disco number. Think Kano, if you have to, Then the next track, Big Sleep, is very, very good too. And then Somebody Up There likes it. Somebody Up There, amazing. If you can nail or are willing to place an instrumental in the middle of the album, you are a potential genius and care about the album as a listening experience that is proof that the album might be or is something rather special. New Gold Dream is really, really good too. What a title track. One of the most impressive tracks that the Simple Minds ever put out, certainly. Glittering Prize is good, but very large production, so elaborate and rote and almost stale, but a pretty awesome arrangement still. The way the bass guitar speedily flies throughout that song, supplemented with the great keyboard stabs and sonics of McNeil, I think it's a really interesting composition. The fact that it comes together as a really hooky and effective pop number is quite fascinating and impressive to me, I will say. I mean, lyrically, it's so rote and obvious and kind of... it almost makes you wince listening to it, just, I'm putting you on a pedestal, and it's just so hollow and vacuous and in a way, but the arrangement is really strong. As a piece of recorded music, it does engage me. Yeah. Hunter and the Hunted is good stuff, obviously, featuring a wonderful guest appearance keyboard solo from the great Herbie Hancock. And who would have guessed that Herbie Hancock was on a Simple Minds album at any point, right? Final track, King is White, stellar closer. What an amazing experience of a track list of sort of banal, straight up, straightforward, and unpretentious, but also very pretentious pop music indulgence. What do we make of this sort of thing? This is the ultimate pop music album. Pop music as I understand it, pop music as it was in the... Pop music! What that meant in the 2000s? New Gold Dream is the genesis of this, more or less. Not genesis as in the rock/pop group. Genesis as in the start, as in book of. The pop sound as I formatively knew it in the early 21st century, that feels downstream of what was really defined on Simple Minds' New Gold Dream 81, 82, 83, 84 in 1982. I'm trying to think of what is the pure pop album prior to New Gold Dream. There are disco albums, there are soft rock albums, there are psychedelic pop albums. There are specificities and nuances and idiosyncrasies and characteristics of the likes of Off the Wall, Rumours, Pet Sounds. New Gold Dream is just pure shopping mall pop music. In terms of what I understand as pop music and the imagery associated with pop music, the lifestyle, and the general aesthetics associated with pop music, it's Simple Minds' New Gold Dream, in my mind anyway. This is the one album where Simple Minds are pretty cool, and it's one of the few times where 80s popular music is trying to be a bit more spiritual and something higher and transcendent. It's very easy for 80s pop music to be very superficial, very, nice restaurant, fancy clothes, and generally kind of optimistic, sunny, and very materialistic lifestyle. No religion, no higher goals, just, cars and food and friends and all this other, tangible nonsense. No world disappearance, none of this 60s or 70s nonsense for the 80s, right? But New Gold Dream is Jim Kerr and the gang really trying to be something more, really yearning for something higher, more lucid, right? The end result is essentially tacky pop music for teenage boys and girls, but all the same, it is bubblegum, but it's classy, refined, posh bubblegum. It's one of the few times where 80s music can be effectively, especially 80s mainstream new wave synthy pop music, can be considered to be potentially or even a deliberate stab at being something, dare I say, quite maybe deep. Things like the Waterboys tried to be deep, obviously. The Simple Minds is adjacent to that scene. U2 tried to be deep. It's adjacent to that big music, sort of spiritual, Celtic/Irish, Gaelic, spiritual. We're gonna, these great big experiences you get when you hold your arms out over the cliff facing the ocean, sort of thing. That whole deal. But then there's also the Smiths, which was very. The Smiths is very bleak, and Morrissey's disposition was very dour. Although there was a sense of beauty and something more and ethereal and the old world and spirituality within there was a kind of yearning for something other than just the pure material in Morrissey, for example. And in some post-punk, Joy Division, Echo and the Bunnymen, Sad Lovers and Giants, maybe even The Cure, whoever you want to name. A lot of this finds itself popularly manifested and possibly even inspired by the lofty ideals of Simple Minds on New Gold Dream. How many other bands heard New Gold Dream, saw the artwork and felt, we want to bring a kind of spiritual empowerment to the masses through this big arena, stadium, big rock pop music? U2 went on to proselytize and attempt to raise the audiences of these stadiums they were playing. And I wonder to what degree they were inspired by Simple Minds. We hear a lot about how Simple Minds changed their sound to fit U2. But I wouldn't be surprised if, U2 haven't released War yet. We've just got Boy in October. I wouldn't be surprised if U2 changed their sound significantly to try and match what Simple Minds are doing on New Gold Dream, to be honest. Certainly, Sparkle in the Rain sounds like a precognitor of what U2 were going to do later, or what U2 were already... It's different from The Unforgettable Fire, even though both have the same... No, different producer. Eno on Unforgettable Fire, Lily White on Sparkle in the Rain. Lily White had done U2's War. So Sparkle in the Rain may have been an example of Simple Minds inspired by U2, but I sometimes think that War is U2 inspired by Simple Minds, just a touch. If Simple Minds are ever cool, and if you can convince modern audiences, younger audiences, that Simple Minds, the band behind that cheesy, corny Don't You Forget About Me nonsense, is actually cool, well, New Gold Dream is going to be a pretty easy way of getting them to think that, oh wow, Simple Minds can be cool? Who would have thought? You listen to this album and you become a poptimist. It's so bizarre. It makes you realise why someone like Mark Fisher had a reverence for pop music and was sometimes disdainful or suspect of sort of macho claptrap rock and roll music. And you know what? New Gold Dream makes a great case in its own way for what it believes in. Can't deny this.